let's talk about the stalls. The recovery maneuver is the same for all stalls. We want to recover at buffet or stick shaker, whichever comes first. And generally that'll be the buffet on the clean stall, and normally stick shaker on the turning stall and on the approach to landing stall. That will be the stick shaker. The only time you really get the buffet is when you're doing the clean stall. You'll feel buffet before stick shaker. Now in the desktop you're not going to feel that. You can kind of hear it though. If you listen to the audio, you'll hear the airframe start to shake, but you can't feel it. And normally you will feel it in the simulator, that buffeting that starts. And really we can recover right at that point. You only get that in the clean stall. In the Dash 8 you do get buffeting in the turning stall. And in the 400 you don't. But it's interesting, the Dash 8 you do. So you could actually recover at buffet on the turning stall in the Dash 8. You will get the airspeed low indication first, but that's ignored for training and for checking. So we just cancel the ICAS or cancel the oral alert, and we'll announce airspeed low, but we don't do anything about it because at that point we want to continue to buffet or stick shaker for the training and checking aspect of it. But in real life, it would be when you hear airspeed low, there's something wrong and you're going to recover at that point. And again, generally we want to apply positive nose down elevator to break the stall by reducing the angle of attack. We used to fly out of these stalls. We used to get the stick shaker and add power and level the wings, let's say, if we were in a turn, and we would hold the pitch where it was, and we would fly out of stick shaker. And that's the way we did it for years. But then because of the stall accidents that occurred, the FAA started to say we want to see a positive break of the stall. And we used to do it, again, for years, and you wouldn't lose any altitude. You would basically just maintain the altitude while you fly out of the stick shaker. Now it's okay to lose altitude. It's not. We don't want to lose a lot of altitude, but you want to break the stall, and so it is okay to lose altitude. You'll see on one of them that I do, I could have lowered the nose a little bit more than I did. I kind of lowered it after a couple seconds, and really you want to break the stall right away. So if I were critiquing myself, I would say that hey, you need to lower the nose a little bit more because you're kind of flying out of stick shaker. You want that positive nose down elevator to recover and stop the stick shaker, and then have the airplane lose some altitude. That's okay. And then as we recover, we're going to wait till the speed gets close to the bug speed, and then we'll pitch up slowly to maintain whatever altitude we lost. And again, during the recovery, it is okay to lose altitude, but once the speed picks up back to your bug speed, then we'll increase our pitch to hold our altitude. And then once we're back on speed, then we can continue climbing back to our initial altitude, which is going to be 4,000 in most cases. We do have to use thrust to start the acceleration. There was one instructor who was an examiner, and I had him for a proficiency check one time. And this is an instructor / examiner. And he was telling me it's mainly pitch on the stall recoveries, and that the power is not as important. And I said no, that they're a combination. I said if you do pitch only and you don't add power, you're shortly going to be in trouble. And he said, yeah, but you got to break the stall. I said, yeah, I agree, you got to break the stall, but you have to add power to power out of it. I said, if you don't add power along with the pitch, you're going to get in trouble. And he kind of disagreed in some sense. He said, well, you don't have to add a lot of power. I said, well, yeah, you do. You have to add enough power to fly out of it. And sure enough, we get in the simulator and we do the first stall, And he lowered the nose, he broke the stall, but he didn't add power. He didn't move the power at all. And it didn't take long before we were into deep stick shaker with the airplane shaking like a son of a gun and losing altitude because we're now in a deep stall. And the only way out of that then was to break the stall, lower the nose again. Luckily we had altitude. But I think in this case he didn't add the power, and so we just got into this deep, deep stall and started descending rapidly. And I stopped the simulator. I just watched it for about, I'd say, a good 30 seconds until I could see that things were getting out of control fast, and I stopped it. And I said, so what was wrong with this? and it turned out to be the certainly the power. So I made him a believer that day that, yeah, if you don't have power, you're not gonna fly out of it. You're gonna get right back into it. So power thrust is required to start the acceleration. Yes, we want to break the stall with pitch, but you have to add power as well in order to start the acceleration out of it. If the speed brake is extended, we need to stow it, and we do that on the first stall, which is called a level off stall, and we will have the speed brake out in that case. We're going to maintain lateral control with ailerons. We don't use any rudder. Rudder can aggravate things, so if we need to maintain any lateral control, it's with ailerons only. And we look through the flight director. We don't use the flight director. The flight director is on when you're doing this maneuver because it's simulating a situation where you didn't realize perhaps that the auto throttle was off. And there's 3 situations that we do this in with the autopilot engaged. And once we get buffet or stick shaker, that's when we can disconnect the autopilot and recover at that point. And we don't change gear or flap configuration until we're safely out of the stall. And in this case, they're talking about the approach to landing stall, which we do on an ILS approach. And generally, during the stall recovery, we're not changing gear or flap. But once we get back on speed, then we would decide to, in that case, go around. We used to teach this that you could, as long as you had control of it, you could continue with the ILS. So we used to do this landing stall on the ILS, and then we would say, go ahead and continue to follow the flight director and for a manual landing for the ILS. Well, the FAA didn't like that because they said if this happened for real and you were surprised by it and you're on the ILS approach, are you going to continue the approach? You're probably going to go around and sort it out then what happened. So yeah, I kind of agree with that. For training, I always liked doing a landing out of it instead of just going around. But on a check ride, we teach them to, once you're back on speed, now it's a missed approach. It's not don't try to land. We still may do it in training to a landing because we want to do something other than the miss. And manually flown ILS to a landing at that point in the training is actually good. But on a check, you need to go around. So here's the 3 stalls. One is called a level off stall, the other one is a turning base stall, and the other one is a landing stall. And so the level off stall will be normally we're at 6,000 feet, and the instructor or the examiner says descend and maintain 4,000. And then the student would put in 4,000 and he'd select flight level change. And then the next thing out of the instructor's mouth or the examiner's mouth is expedite to 4,000. And so since we're already at 250 knots at 4,000 feet, we can't increase the speed. So the only thing we could do is add speed brakes. So we bring the speed brakes, extend the speed brakes, and then as we're descending to 4,000, the instructor/examiner will disconnect the auto throttle from the mode control panel from the auto throttle arm switch, and then have the student clear the warning with the auto throttle disconnect on the control column. And this is all done on the autopilot. The autopilot's engaged at this point. And so as we get to 4,000, the airplane will level off at 4,000, but the auto throttle is not engaged. And the auto throttle arm switch is off, so the auto throttle is not going to come back. even if it had a wake-up feature, it's not going to come back because you have the auto throttle arm switch off. And so as the airplane slows down, we'll get the airspeed low, and we'll recognize that, but we won't do anything about it. And then we can recover at buffet or stick shaker, whichever comes first. Now you'll see I took it down to stick shaker. I probably could have recovered when I heard the airframe, because I can't feel it, but I heard it on the aero winks. So I could have recovered at that point, you'll notice on the clean stall, but I let it go to stick shaker and then I recovered because I didn't feel anything. And then once we recover out of that, normally the autopilot's put back on once you're back to 4,000 feet. Okay, moving into the stalls, here we are on the downwind leg for the ILS approach to runway 34 right at Seattle. We're going to go ahead and we get the descent to 4,000 feet. We go flight level change. ATC says expedite to 4,000 feet, so we extend the speed brakes. And as we start down, we keep the speed at 250 knots. And then we go ahead and turn off the auto throttle arm switch. And then I also remove the auto throttle disconnect message from ICAS. And then we're basically sitting there fat, dumb, and happy
1,000 feet an hour.
until the airplane levels off at 4,000 and gets too slow. So the idea is that you're distracted, you didn't notice the auto throttle's off. And again, we are going to ignore the airspeed low message, and we're going to recover at stick shaker or buffet, whichever comes first. Now you'll notice I'm going to do it right at stick shaker. I could have done it when you hear the buffeting, if you hear it. You can't feel it, but you can hear it. So you notice the airplane levels off at 4,000. The auto throttle arm switch is off. The airplane decelerates. And remember, we have the speed brakes extended now. So when we recover, there's the airspeed low. We're going to have to add power, lower the pitch, and retract the speed brakes more or less all at the same time. Here comes stick shaker. Okay, disconnect the autopilot. I'm a little slow in lowering the pitch here. And then I retract it, and that's probably because I'm trying to find the button to retract the speed brakes.
Check speed.
You notice I keep the nose down there. I can lose some altitude, that's fine. Airspeed comes up. When it gets back to bug speed, I'm going to power back. I'm kind of just holding my altitude now, and now I can power back to the bug. And that's the end of the maneuver. Once I power back at the bug, it's over. I can now climb to 4,000 feet, which I'm starting to do. And then I can get the autopilot on anytime, or call for the autopilot, and then get the modes I want to be in back. So you see I engage the left autopilot command. I bring the auto throttle arm switch back to arm, and I go back to the speed mode.